Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we are looking at Chapter 4, Book 6, uh, about democracy, establishing democracy, and it's going to talk about the types of democracy. So let's go to it. Chapter 4. It says, the first thing is, of the four sorts of democracy, again, this he's uh, uh, again he repeats the conclusion of Book 5. No, book 4, chapter 5, 6, sorry, 6, where there it says it's four types of democracies. We get four. We get four oligarchies, four democracies. Originally in book 4, chapter 4, there were five original democracies. But what happened is the first gets forgotten, and from the second onwards is continued as the four types of democracy, where the first is the farmer sort, and the last is the Banusai, or the working urban democracy, the large suburban democracy. So he says, well, let's go look at it for a second. He says here, the best one, the best is the one that is first in the arrangement spoken of in the discourses preceding these. It is also the oldest of them of all. So this is 12. And book 4, 6. Now this is that interesting note that I was the five varieties of democracy I listed at 4.4, chapters 22, 25. But the one appears to be democracy based on the rich and the poor, the equality of rich and poor that is discussed in 6.2. In other words, the five of the five varieties that are listed in this. But one of these appears to be the democracy based on the equality of the rich and the poor, discussed in chapter 2. There's the equality of those two, and that is the first one. In fact, first of the five, not the four. That is kind of forgotten. Um, so that's something interesting that we'd like to think about for a second. Um, so the first of the arrangements spoken of in the preceding chapters. This is the oldest of them, and most of the oldest democracy. Okay, this is the small democracy, the natural democracy. But I call it first in the sense that one might distinguish among peoples. I call it first in the sense that one might distinguish among peoples. The best people is the farming sort. So of different types of peoples, of multitudes, are going to be uh, uh, what here? This is the best people, the best multitude is the farming sort, so that it is possible also to create the best democracy wherever the multitude lives from farming or herding. Okay, so that the farming or herding, if they're the majority, these are this is the multitude, the farming multitude and the herding multitude. This is the best type of sort. On account of not having much property, it is lacking leisure, and so is unable to hold frequently assemblies because they do not have the necessary things. They spend their time at work and do not desire the things of others. Indeed, working is more pleasant to them than engaging in politics and ruling, while there are not great spoils to be gotten from the office. So they're not able to great sport. So this is a very interesting point here about this. He says that that if you're going to be, they have what they working, they have things, they're able to meet, they have some means. The farmers do. So on account of this, um, the farming or the herding is the best. Because on what? On account of their not having property, they lack leisure, and therefore, because they lack leisure, they can't hold lots of frequent assemblies, and they'd rather work than spend. Because working sustains them, and that you can't get you can't. In other words, you can't get spoils from politics. The argument is, if they're not great spoils to be gotten from office, right? For the many strive more for profit than for honor. So the many strive more for profit than for honor. A sign of this is that they used to they're used to put up with ancient tyrannies and still put up with oligarchies if no one prevents them from working or takes away anything from them. For before long, some of them even become rich, while others cease to be poor. So, in other words, the work. This echoes what Machiavelli says in book on his prince, right? Don't take the people's. If long as the poor, the many, strive more for profit than for honor. Okay, and because of this, as long as you, as long as a tyrant doesn't prevent them from making the ancient tyrannies or oligarchies don't prevent them from working and making profit and getting wealthy. As long as you don't interfere with their profit making, their ability to make profit, they're not going to be upset, right? Further, if they have any element of ambition, having authority to elect an audit would satisfy their needs. So the poor, the multitude, if they have any kind of ambition, it's going to be limited ambition because their ambition would be about, and therefore they'd be satisfying ability to elect somebody and audit. Indeed, among some people, it is sufficient for the many if they have no shares in election to offices, but certain persons are elected to do this for all by turns, as in Montrina, provided they have the authority over deliberation. In other words, uh, they have no share in election to the offices. In other words, they can't get into the office, but but certain persons are elected to do this, so that they have no share in election to do the offices. Uh, uh, um, I mean, they don't. What is meant by no share? It's sufficient that if they have no share in election to the offices, they can't be elected to the offices, they're saying. But certain persons are elected to do this from all of them by turns. Whoever they do it, but they do it by turns, provided they have authority. The people, the many, have authority over deliberation. Um, One should consider even this a certain form of democracy, as it once existed in Mentorina. Now, nothing is known of the arrangements. This is only where it's only known about here. In other words, it is even sufficient to call this democracy that many have no share in election offices, but certain persons are elected to do this by turns, provided they have authority over deliberation. Right? People they deliberate, they make the things, and the office is executing them. Right? Uh, um, that's interesting in that sense. Hence, it is both advantageous and customary belongs to the sort of democracy spoken of earlier, to have all elect to the offices and audit and adjudicate, but for persons elected on the basis of assessment to hold offices. And the greatest of and the greater from the greatest assessment, or else elect none on the basis of assessment, but rather capable persons. So, therefore, in other words, that all have the ability to elect to the offices and they audit and adjudicate. Right? This is, but people to be elected, persons elected should on the basis of assessment to hold the offices. So that you have to have some property, you have to have something. And then maybe the greatest offices, in other words, lower offices, lower assessments, but higher offices, greater assessments. Um, and or else to elect none on the basis of assessment, but rather on capable persons, merit. Okay, those who govern themselves in this way must be governed finely, beautifully governed, nomia. This is must necessarily be well governed, beautifully governed. The offices will always be in the hands of the best persons, the person being willing and not envious of the respectable, while the arrangement is satisfactory for the respectable and the notable. So therefore, it's in other words, someone who is not envious of the respectable, and the people are still governing, right? These will not be ruled by others. The notables, respectable, will not be ruled by others who are their inferiors, and will rule, and they rule. Oh, sorry. These will not be ruled by others who are their inferiors. These people who have been separated, and they will rule justly by the fact that others have authority over the audits. They're being checked, right? They're being checked. So as long as that these are um, there's an arrangement that was just talked about. The better sorts will pick, get in, hold the offices, right? And what's happening is that these people don't. This is respect. This is kind of the respectable, notable, satisfactory, because these people are not going to be done by ruled. They don't like. They'll resent being ruled by inferiors people. In other words, if someone who they think is not, is vulgar, they'll resent it. Okay? Um, um, and they will rule justly by the fact that others will have authority over them, over the audits. Those are being checked. For to be under constraint and unable to do everything one might resolve to do is advantageous. In other words, restraint. You just simply can't do whatever you want. This is why. This is that point about where in book 3 about the necessity for law. And while as long as law rules, it moderates both oligarchy and democracy. It's only when law is lost or dismissed and the will of the rulers are allowed to do. This is what produces tyranny. And that's why the regime without law, the rule of the mass, the urban democracy that is ruling without law, or the dynastic oligarchy that's ruling without law. These are forms of tyranny. He argues, or says argued. Um, so to be under constraint is to do whatever one might resolve. Do is advantageous. So checks and balances. The license to do whatever one wishes cannot defend against the mean element in every human being. In other words, there's a problem. And the mean element, the worst. This is not the average element. The mean here is that this is the wrong. This is that in every human person, in every human being, there's a vicious element, something wrong. This is base or vicious that will come out. Uh, so it is necessary. So it necessarily results that the respectable rules without falling into error, while the multitude goes not while the multitude does not get less than its due, something that is most beneficial for regimes. So, in other words, in this situation, this is most beneficial. Why? Because the multitude does not get less than what it's due to them, what it merits, what is justly theirs, and the respectable does not get them. They're checked, and they're not allowed to go into error, right? So in other words, this is why that's why they're having the people audit, to be able to audit the respectable people. That's a way to check them. So there's some kind of mechanism here. He's saying that this is the best sort of democracy. Then is evident, and the reason for this, that it is because the people are of a certain quality. With a view to instituting a farming people, certainly certain of the laws that existed among many in ancient times are necessary and useful. Laws either generally forbidding the possession of land beyond a certain measure or forbidding it between a certain location and the town and the city. In other words, um, certain lands of this between a certain location and a town and a city. In ancient times, there also used to be legislation forbidding the sale of the original allotments. Right, original allotments out there. You can't sell those. There is also the law that they say derives from Oculus, which has the same sort of power, forbidding borrowing against any part of the land belonging to an individual. In other words, you want to make sure the lands can't be so you can't lose your birthright. This is if you want to keep farmers in this thing, you can't sell it off. You can't give it away. You can't create these huge farms. Um, Given things as they are at present, one should attempt reform through the law of the Assyrians as well, for it is useful in relation to what has been spoken of. Now, there should be a note here. Okay, let's continue this. Let's go. Although there are many of them, they possess little land. In other words, the Assyrians nevertheless all engage in farming, for they are not assessed on the basis. For they are not. Therefore, there's many of them, but what is it? But they have little land, right? And all engage in farming, for they are not assessed on the basis of the whole estates as originally allotted, but they divide these into parts of such a size that even the poor have enough to enable them to exceed the assessment that is required for citizenship. So, um, Oxius is the ancient legislature of Elis, right? And nothing else is known of the legislation of Empilus, and the meaning of the text is somewhat uncertain. The town, like its neighbor Padilla, had probably been settled as a colony, with citizenship restricted to those owning the equivalent of the original allotment of land. The latter, as a result of increasing population, the assessment was eventually reduced to ownership of a small fraction of the allotment. So, as this, the original situation was only those who had land would do it, but then what happened was, as the population grew, what happened? That the owners of land would be few, so they broke up the lots. Okay, um, so to ensure that there was still that the principles that you had to own land, own property, uh, uh, um, and that kept the nature of that didn't change the regime from the worker democracy. Everyone was farmers. Um, so if the farming multitude, again, the farming multitude, those who do this is the best. After the farming multitude, the best sort of people exist where they're herdsmen and live from livestock. Okay, so after the farming, the best sort of people is the livestock, right? And these are in a condition similar to farmers. And in what relates to military activities, they are particularly well exercised with respect to their dispositions, as well as useful with respect to their bodies and capable of living in the open. So, okay, these livestock people herders, or people who live in livestock, these people who are they're like farmers, and they're living in the open, right? They're capable of having being useful with respect to their bodies and capable of living in the open. Now, so that's the farming multitude, then the herding multitude, right? Herding and live from their herdsmen and live from livestock. Now, the other sorts of multitude out of which the remaining sorts of democracy are constituted are almost all much meaner than these. Their way of life is a mean one. No task involving virtue among the things that occupy the multitude of human beings who are workers and merchants, or the multitude of laborers. So, um, again, this is the craftsman. I think workers are craftsmen, or benoi. That's, I think workers. I have to be careful. Um, the merchants, those who exchange, workers, merchants, and laborers. Laborers are those who lose their bodies. Right? That's benasoi. Uh, these are meaner ones. So therefore, there's workers, the arts and craftsmen, the merchants, and the multitude laborers. Right. So the other ones. Now notice he doesn't go in each other. He doesn't really. We'll notice this. He doesn't go as much detail in these other ones as he goes into with in other words, there's something common with these. The craftsmen, the arts, the crafts guildsmen, the craftsmen, the merchants, and the laborers, right? Further, on account of their always frequently the marketplace in the town, nearly all persons of this type can easily attend the assembly. In other words, these kind of people, because they're so much in the market, in the assembly, they're going to be there, or farmers are going to be farther away. Um, while those engaged in farming, on account of their being scattered in the country, do not come together in this way and have no need of doing so. So that there's something about these people, the techne, the art, the craftsmen, the merchants, those who engage in trade, and the laborers, physical laborers, and therefore the physical labor only have their bodies. They have to go to market to sell their labor, right? These people are always in the market, right? They're in the marketplace and in town. They're going to be near there. The farmers are not. Okay, but where it happens, that the position of the territory is such that the country is far removed from the city, it is easy to create a decent democracy or a regime, polity or regime. In other words, if the country is far removed from the city, so it's in other words if the country that the country is far removed from the city, for the multitude that is compelled to have the dwelling places and fields, so that even where there is a mass of merchants, one should not hold assemblies. One should not hold assemblies in democracies without the multitude of the country. So, in other words, you better make sure the largest part of the population is in the country. Okay, so this is the way you have to design it. The country is out here far from the city, and that therefore it's the center of the city where the market is. This these people here are more numerous than the city in that sense. Um, if you can arrange it, everything is connected to the city, the same thing. That's something else. This is like the line. For the multitude is compelled to have a dwelling places in the fields, so that so where there is that even where there is a mass of merchants, one should not hold assemblies in democracy without the multitude from the country. So again, this is his attack. In other words, the farming democracy. This sounds like Thomas Jefferson's whole argument about the farmers and that farmers are the. That's very Aristotelian in a sense. Um, how the best and first sort of democracy should be instituted, then, has been spoken of. How the other should be instituted is also evident. They should deviate progressively, always separating out a worse multitude, always separating out a worse multitude for citizenship. It was limiting citizenship, limiting franchise from the worst. In other words, in other words, of these things, the worst are the laborers, the physical laborers, or one of and therefore you limit. In other words, the nature of this is always going to limit that. If you're going to have the people, you better have the farmers. That's the best. The herders, then the craftsmen, then the merchants, then the laborers. Okay, right? Always separating out the worst multitude for citizenship. The final sort, the final sort account. Sorry. Yeah, the final sort, on account of all participating in it, is one that is not easy. Is one. In other words, the final last democracy, right? The last democracy. Everyone participates in it. Everyone participates in this. He says that this is one that not every city can support, nor is it easy for it to last, as it is not well composed with respect to both its laws and customs. In other words, the last democracy just is not going to last long. It's very difficult to. You need wealth. You need lots of wealth to do it. It's very expensive to do it. Have everyone participate and everyone do this, and it's going to be a lot bad because it doesn't respect laws. As what like it says is, as to what results in the destruction of both this and of the other regimes. This was for the most part spoken of earlier. Again, this is this comment here about this. It's true that this is the problem that what the last democracy is just unstable because one, it's simply going to destroy itself because it's first of all it's so rare because it requires so much wealth to be able to pay people to do this, pay the poor. It's not going to sustain itself, and because these by doing this, it brings out the worst of the people. To get the money, they have to take away from. They always wage war on the people who make the profit, and once the money's gone, the thing collapses, right? So therefore, this is that a point here. This is what's unstable about it. With a view of establishing this sort of democracy, those at the head of affairs customarily make the people stronger by adding as many persons as possible, admitting as citizens not only those who are legitimate, but even bastards, and those descended from a citizen, and those descended from a citizen either way. I mean, either from the father or the mother, or for this whole element is proper to this sort of people. In other words, this whole element of bastards, whoever's a bastard, illegitimate children, and things like this. Popular leaders customarily instituted demagogues. Again, popular leaders, demagogues constantly instituted in this way. Then, in fact, however, one should add citizens up to the point where the multitude predominates over the notables and the middling elements. This is the first time I mentioned middling elements here so far, and not proceed beyond this. In other words, in fact, however, one should add citizens up to a point where the multitude predominates over the notables and the middling elements, and not proceed beyond this. So in other words, you should have a situation where the multitude of citizens, who are the multitude of the people, that they should not exceed the notables and the middle. Anything more than that, oops, then this is goes. For if the lower elements are in excess, they introduce disorder into the regime and goad the notables into looking harshly on democracy and not putting up with it. Something which turned out to be the case in the Stasis faction company. That's Krine. Um, Again, this is the reference to civil descendants of Krine Diotosilikos, history of this. Um, now he's going to talk about it. A base element is tolerated if it is few, but if it becomes more numerous, it is more in front of one's eyes. Also, in other words, a base element can be tolerated if it's few, but if it's going to be everywhere and everywhere, people react against it. Also useful with a view to a democracy of this sort are the sort of institutions that Cleisthenes used in Athens when he wanted to enhance democracy, or those at Crene, where who established the rule of the people. Now, for the reforms of Cleisthenes, you should look at the Athenian constitution, the Athenian regime by Aristotle, uh, you know, chapter 21. It talks about the Cleisthean reforms. That is what he did was he divided it into cities and tribes. Right. These are the things he needs to do. And the reference to Cleisthenes is probably the establishment of democracy around the democratic regime at 462 BC. So, in other words, if you're going to take this last democracy, you should follow what he does. The divisions of tribe. Again, I think chapter 21. I said chapter 21 of the chapter 21 of the Athenian Constitution. Yes. Um, okay, let's go doing this. Others and more numerous tribes and clans are, in other words, the tribes and clans. These are the small units that are created. Private rights incorporated into a few common rights. And everything devised so that all are mixed together to be the greatest possible extent, and their and their previous familiar associations broken up. In other words, you need to create few common rights, everything like this, all the other words, and everyone's mixed together as much as possible, right? And divided. And the more numerous the tribes and clans are to be created. Private rights should be few. In other words, you divide it into all these should be local units. This is, again, that's Cleisthenes reforms. Further, tyrannical institutions too are held to be characteristically popular. What? Tyrannical institutions too are held to be characteristically popular. Okay, this is kind of scary, isn't it? I mean, for example, the lack of rules over slaves, which might be advantageous to a democracy up to a certain point, on account of, as well as over women and children, and tolerating everyone living as he wants. For the element assisting a democracy of a regime of this sort will be considerable. Living in a disorderly way is more pleasant to the many than living with moderation. So, in other words, this radical democracy is the most extreme democracy. It is going to have lack of. In other words, there's not going to be rules controlling slaves, women, children. They get to do what they want. They get more power, and this would be this leads us to the last democracy. So let's stop here. We end here. Like this is point here is that this is very negative. In one sense, we see the problem here that farmers are the best. The urban democracy is the laboring sort. The urban democracy is where everyone does this. Well, he describes the best and he describes the worst, and and he allows you to create the worst too. He suggests what you need. You need money. He warns against it. But then he said, if you're going to do it, then you should do it the way Cleisthenes did it, right? And divide it up as possible, make everything balanced out, right? Otherwise, it won't last long. And even Cleisthenes regime didn't last long. I can argue. Well, it did. It lasted pretty long. But he says there's a problem here. For the element assisting the regime of this sort will be considerably, and that's it. Because why it's the disorderly way of life is pleasant to the many rather than living in moderation. So therefore, the women, the slaves, the children, the vulgar, this huge group, and they're going to be assisting the regime. This element assisting a regime of this sort. Right? That's why it's support. That's why this is its stability in that sense. This is its power, maybe. So we'll stop here. This is chapter 4. It's a long chapter. We will, if you have any questions, yeah, or comments or things you want to talk about this chapter, um, please put your comments below, and when I see them, I will respond. Um, if you like it, share it with a friend, share it on social media, point it out. If you've not subscribed, subscribe. Get a friend to subscribe to the channel. Um, if you didn't like it, please say why in the comments. Like, explain what's wrong, or some criticism that, or even about the section, either about what's being done here or things. Another thing you can do is talk about. Okay, um, that's another thing you can do is you want to follow me on social media. The information's below. The links are below. If you want to, if you want to assist the channel continuing and growing a little bit and funding it, helping do it, help out, you can do so by Patreon or Subscribestar, listed below. Or another way you can help is buy my book, my Lulu book. This is a notebook for ourselves politics, dealing with the politics, right? It is a kind of Cliff's Notes of politics. It's not a commentary or interpretation per se. Rather, this is a kind of a textbook, not a guidebook to go through the politics. It's kind of like it's a reader's guide. It helps you go through it. It has it outlines. It may just divides up book by book, chapter by chapter. It goes through it, showing the structures and showing some of the charts, graphing it, so that you can see that to understand the various sections, similar to what we've been doing here in the reading. So that's it. If you buy it by Lulu, I get what the publish the not publisher, but what if you buy it by Amazon, they have to get a profit, and Barnes and Noble, bookstores make profit, right? They get their little profit. If you buy it by Lulu, I get the share that the bookstore will get. So that's why, even though they charge for delivery, whereas Amazon doesn't always charge. But please, just do whatever you do, buy it for you, buy a copy for yourself, or buy it for a friend, buy it for a student. Let's do this. So that's it. We'll stop here. We'll look at chapter 5 tomorrow, and have a good day.